driven behavior change. So I'm just going to introduce myself first because I keep forgetting to do that. My name is Erin. I'm working right now in Ghana with the African programs on the MOFA Rural Agriculture team. So I'm going to be facilitating this session, and I'm just going to tell you a bit about the way it's going to happen. So we have with us Robert Chambers and Ron Dembo. Each of them are going to speak for 20 minutes on some strategies and methodologies that they use for community behavior change. And I want you guys to listen very carefully to them, because after that we're going to brainstorm some of the things that you heard, some of the elements that you can use for community behavior change. And then we're going to use the rest of the session to design our own behavior change plans. So this is kind of a combo panel and workshop. So be thinking of a change that you want to make maybe in your chapter, in your workplace, in your community. And we're going to have the three of us kind of milling around, I guess, for the end of the session while you guys are creating your plans. We can talk about different ideas, feedback, that kind of thing. So if you don't like that, you can go to another session. Okay, so we're going to get started right away, and Robert Chambers is going to start us off. Wait, let me introduce you first, just in case no one knows who you are in this room, which is possible. Yeah. So I think most of us have probably heard of Robert Chambers, especially in EWP. He's fairly well known. He's a research associate at the Institute of Development Studies for the University of Sussex. He's credited for leading the way for participatory rural appraisal, or PRA, or any of the other acronyms that usually are associated with that. He's an expert on community-led total sanitation, CLTS, and I think that will be the focus of his talk today. It's a very interesting behavior change method. And he's a prolific author. There's a few things at the back if you're interested that you can look at, handouts that you can pick up. A lot of great books. My favorite is Participatory Workshops. I use it all the time. And he's a multidisciplinary background in biology, history, and public administration. So we're very happy to have him with us here today.
I'll start with this one.
If you want to
that one.
Yep.
Don't confuse me, I can't count more than one. Do you know that thing about there are three types of social scientists? Do you know that?
Yeah.
Those who can count and those who can't. I'm not sure which I think I'm kind of embarrassed by the introduction that you used the word. It's very nice. The word expert. You used the word expert. I mean, I'm really. I mean, we're all continuous learners. This business about failing forward, I completely agree with. There's one of the definitions I heard of an expert. Well, it's an ordinary person a long way from home. That was one of them. But the other one was a drip under pressure. I think I'm both. This is going to be about community-led total sanitation, and whether there are any lessons that we collectively can draw from this, or whether it's just a very special case. In the room, I guess we've some people who've got the experience with this, and I think there are some people who've got more experience than I have. Who's heard of community-led total sanitation? Oh my God! Well then, what's the point? I mean, you know it. And who has actually been involved in field situations? Because a number of you from who worked on it in I think in Burkina, but particularly Malawi. Are you the only one? Anyway, because there are quite a lot. I mean, the EWB has been very active there. This word community is very problematic, and we have to bear that in mind all the way through, because communities have got all sorts of differences within them, which we won't go into. But it's liable to be taken as a sort of block word, which we don't disaggregate, and that can lead to a lot of problems. The World Bank adopted the phrase community-driven, and it became fashionable, and so practically every project which they had was stamped with community-driven, and then an evaluation was done which showed that the quality of participation was often, how shall I put it, questionable. However, community-led total sanitation, when it happens well, seems to be in a slightly different space. The history of this is a long history of failure. I had actually put it together. Where it came from. So where it came from. By the time you get to my doddery old age, your short-term memory isn't very good. Where it came from was an extraordinarily long history of failures, which were really not recognised for their implications. And this was the idea: okay, people in rural areas deserve and need sanitation. They can't afford decent sanitation. They deserve it. Particularly the poor people can't help it. So we've got to provide it for them. And so I'm tempted to say all over the developing world, I mean, country after country, program after program, there were attempts to introduce sanitation through subsidies. I mean, have any of you worked on such a program? Yeah. Well, do contradict me if you wish. Your experience may have been different. But we've asked endless people, what was your experience? And in general, the experience is that it's very disappointing. That structures are built, and people either dismantle them and use them for other purposes, or they use them for storing fuel. In India, I'm told, I've never seen it, as a shrine. And in general, very ineffective, usually about half of them not used, and open defecation continuing. So what happened was, quite extraordinarily, just at the beginning of 2000, a very unusual, wonderful, charismatic, participatory innovator, whose name is Kamal Kar. Do any of you know him, met him? You have. I mean, he is quite extraordinary. He was doing an evaluation in Bangladesh for an NGO, for water aid and bark. The names don't matter. And what he did was he started innovating, and instead of doing the normal evaluation, he began to get people to do their own analysis and their own appraisal, as we learned to do in a participatory mode. And what happened then was quite extraordinary, because it very quickly became an approach in which people were facilitated to do their own appraisal, their own analysis, and then would very often be so disgusted that they would decide to do something about it. And what has happened since then is that he and then a whole range of others, champions in different parts of the world, have spread this. They've trained other people. It's now in over 40 countries, at least by name. It's not always done well, as happens with almost any participatory approach. And we reckon that something close around 10 million people have been benefited one way or another from this. The approach is very different from the previous approach. It requires a lot of what one might even call reversals. From the subsidy to people do it themselves. From our designs, engineers making them simpler, cheaper, simpler, cheaper, simpler, cheaper, downwards. Instead of that, people do their own. You can see some examples over here on the wall. Do look at these pictures on the wall later. From counting the number of latrines built to the number of communities that have been credibly declared ODF, which is open defecation free. from being sensitive to people's cultural constraints. You know, father-in-law and daughter-in-law can't shit in the same hole. This sort of thing. Say, well, okay, that's your problem. I mean, you know, it's up to you. And people do sort of. From helping those people who are less able, this is one that leads to a lot of debate, helping the people who are less able to help themselves in the community, to facilitating people in the community to help them. And that also can be done. And then from using the polite words, species, excrement, what are the other, I don't know, never mind about polite words. The impolite ones are much more fun. There's a whole glossary over there at the back. And it's over 100 words, and it's continually being added to. At the moment, India is in the lead with 15 different words for shit. Kenya has got about 8, and I'm sure Kenya can do better. Is anyone from Kenya here? No. I'm sure Kenya can catch up quite a bit. And Nigeria ought to be right up there in the lead, because they've got so many languages. We had a little workshop with your African, I don't see any Africans here, but hardly any, but African colleagues. Do you know how many mother tongues we had in the room? Just of the Africans who come here. We had 16 different mother tongues. That includes English and French, but anyway, there was 14 others. Very, very impressive, the diversity. Anyway, the point is that the crude word is always identified and always used. So there are these really big reversals which imply reversals in our behavior. And in a way, the most important one I've left off here, which is from teaching to facilitating. You know, the idea is people need to be taught that their health will be affected, the diarrhea, and all the rest of it. You don't bother about it. You don't teach. In fact, you very explicitly don't teach. There have been other earlier participatory approaches which do involve something which is, they call them participatory, but they're actually teaching. One of them is called FAST. And there's no teaching. So what I think I need to explain to you somehow, I don't know, Jolly-Ann, we haven't discussed this, so it's unfair for me to dump this on. Have you ever facilitated a triggering?
No, because I can't speak the language.
You can't speak the language. You see, the trouble is, I haven't ever facilitated triggering. I've been at quite a number of them. But, well, help me out if I miss something. What happens with a triggering is this, that there's a setup that at some time you're going to go to a community and you convene a meeting of people in the community, and they may be warned in advance that you've come to learn about habits and customs and so on. And then usually you divide the children and the adults into 2 separate groups. So the children do their own analysis and make their own map and everything, and the adults do the same. And you start by all the time saying, we're only here to learn. We haven't come to give you anything or to teach you anything, but usually people are quite enthusiastic about making the map. So they make a map which shows all the households. And then you have with you sawdust, or what do you use in Malawi? For leftovers from the maize mill, something like that, some bran or something. In India, they got lovely yellow powder, which looks absolutely revolting. And then you ask people, when they've done the map and shown all their households, you ask them, and where do you go to shit? You see, and then there's a sort of mixture. The whole thing, there's a mixture of disgust, a little bit of shame, not much shame actually. It's more disgust and a lot of laughter, which is partly, you know, it's a lightning conductor for embarrassment in a way. But, and so they go around and they put it down, and it's usually quite substantial blocks. So there's a lot of yellow or bran or whatever it is around the community. You know, you can see it. Oh my God. And they come and shit near my house. And, you know, and this sort of thing goes on. And then you can ask, and what do you do in the middle of the night when it's raining? Oh. And then I mean, if you go down that path, maybe you don't, perhaps you don't in Malawi, but in India they sometimes go down that path, and you end up with the whole community covered in shit. And then you know, which household, how much do you produce in a household? And you know, who produces the most? And calculates that, you know. And then, oh, well, you do the most, you've got the most, well done, let's give him a big clap. So it goes on like this. And then there's a thing called a transect, which is, you ask it, can we walk and go to the place where you all shit, you see? And you go there and you stand in the middle of it and sort of look at it all. And, you know, people are doing this. Sometimes people have actually vomited. I've never seen that. But do they vomit? No, I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't want to vomit. But anyway, so that all goes on. And then there's a lovely thing which was invented by an Indian woman, actually a government staff member of a sub-district. She was the head of the sub-district. And she invented this one, which is that when you're going in among the shit, you scoop some up, and you take it back. And when you get back to the community, you put it down where everybody can see it, and you bring some boiled rice and put it down next to it. And then the flies come, and the flies go backwards and forwards. And a new one that I've just heard is that on the shit you put some chili powder, and then the rice will gradually turn red. You see, and I mean, people are saying, really, oh, don't worry, it must be two different sorts of fly. You know, there are all sorts of jokes running all the way through this thing. And I won't go on, but there are other things which can be done. And sooner or later, someone will say, because you also ask people to analyze the pathways from the shit to their mouths, and there are many, particularly flies, but not only flies. And then usually somebody, if it's done well, somebody will say, we're eating one another's shit. We've got to stop, you know. And then the good facilitator will say, what did you say? Oh, who agrees? Who agrees? Who disagrees? And then, you know, it plays out among them. And if it goes well, by the end, after about 2 hours, there will be a group formed with people who are going to take a lead in this. There will be a plan. The children who've done exactly the same thing will come and sing songs and confront their parents. And sometimes they will walk, I've seen them walk all the way through a village, shouting and singing songs, you know, we must stop them, blah, blah, you know, whatever it is. And so after this, there is then a process, and it doesn't always work out well, which is follow-up, and people starting to dig. I saw them recently. In Zambia, they were starting to dig the same day. They start to dig, they dig holes, they put up toilets, and with luck, they become open defecation free, and then there's a verification process, a celebration. You can see a celebration up there, top left-hand corner, was the first community in Kenya. That's on World Toilet Day 2 years ago. Big celebration. And then this has spin-off effects in other communities. So that's roughly how the triggering goes. There are lots and lots of issues and problems, particularly over training facilitators and trainers. 5 more minutes. Okay, is there anything you'd like to add about that? There are materials about this at the back. Please feel free to take any of them. I've kept some of them because I should warn you, I'm going to repeat some of this in the next session, which is somewhere else, so you'll be warned not to come. Now, EWB has been involved in this and has innovated in ways in which these processes can be supported. I'm just wondering, Jolyon, we haven't discussed this, so it's a bit mean of me to just swing it, but would you like to say roughly what you do? Because I think it would be of interest. I'm sorry. That's really good. I'll buy you a drink this evening.
For those that don't know who I am, I'm Jolly-Ann. I work on CLTS, and I've been working on it since March. Basically what I do is I work with 12 district governments to implement CLTS, and I work mostly in management coaching. So I help them basically create management processes that make CLTS more effective on the ground. So if that means training for some districts, then I help them plan better trainings. I go with them to the field when we go to trigger villages and to do some follow-ups, and then I facilitate a process of reflection for the managers on so what could have been better with that triggering, or what could have gone better with that follow-up. Why do you think this community is an ODF? What should we do differently next time so that they become ODF? All sorts of things like that. And then we also try to influence UNICEF, basically. That is the main funder for CLTS at the moment. So we try to influence them to kind of provide better technical assistance for the districts that are implementing CLTS.
I'm so happy that you mentioned UNICEF at the end, because UNICEF used to be the major block. In fact, I refused to give money to UNICEF for a time, because they insisted on the subsidies. And if there are subsidies, and people know that there are subsidies, they won't do things to help themselves. You've got to get rid of the subsidies. India is cursed. It's a resource curse. India is cursed by having enough money for lots and lots of subsidies. A national program of subsidies, which is absolutely... India, there are more people shitting in the open in rural India. More than half the people in the world shitting in the open are in rural India. 575 million. And I mean, undernutrition in India. A third of the world's undernourished children, and I think there's a strong link, but that's another subject. Now, I'll draw to a conclusion. What this requires, for this to happen, it requires radical changes. It requires radical changes in organizations, which are funding organizations like UNICEF. It requires radical changes in ideas about good professional behavior. It raises problems for people with big budgets to spend on sanitation about how to spend those budgets. There was a classic case in Bangladesh in the early days where the head of Plan International was really in trouble because he only spent a fifth of his budget, although he actually affected 50 times as many people, at least 50 times as many people with only a fifth of the budget. So there are big, big institutional problems, and we still fight those, and they're still going on. And people, I mean, if any of you ever work in the aid industry, please go into the field, get a sense of the field reality, and don't push your own agenda, but let it be generated in a bottom-up way based on experience. If any of you have a chance to go to a triggering, please do. There are videos of this, but I think it's the most remarkable experience if you do that. So the last thing is we're talking about community-driven behavior change. But there's a basic question about this. It doesn't want to reveal itself. Yes, okay, but whose behavior change? Is it their behavior change? These people in the community, they need to change? Or do we need to change in our behavior and in our relationships with them? The lesson of CLTS is that we need to change first. We need to change institutionally in terms of the drives to spend expenditures, to having targets, to expecting CLTS to be something like an immunization program, which is totally different in many ways. EWB has got strong advantages in supporting the sorts of changes within government and with the people who facilitate and trigger and follow up and support. But when you think about it from the experience that we've had so far, what is absolutely vital is that anyone who's going to do the triggering has to have hands-on experience in real time with communities, more than once. So it's not easy to spread this thing, because unless they have that, then they may find that it won't work. They won't have the guts, the courage, the brazenness even to facilitate in the way which is really needed, because it's different from participatory rural appraisal facilitation, which is being all nice all the time. I mean, it's more a performance, this. It's a performance, it's a teasing, but it's done in good humor and without any malice. And it's, as I mentioned, people are also laughing. So, from their point of view, when we think about them, the behavior change on their side, which is hoped for, is that they will dig, they will set up reasonably hygienic toilets, they will go for hand washing as well, because that's so very important. But it's because they've done their own analysis, they've done their own appraisal, and they've come to their own conclusion and taken their own action. And the question then for you, for all of us, is, okay, in this case, that seems to be what works. We change our behavior, we change our relationship, we enable people, they actually empower themselves to take action themselves. How widely applicable are approaches like this in development? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Robert. All right, so moving right along. I'm going to quickly introduce Ron here. So Ron Dembo, I'm really happy to have him joining us today. He's a fellow Waterloo graduate, which is nice for me. But more than that, he's a very impressive CV. He's the founder and CEO of Zero Footprint, which is a social enterprise. Has two different aspects to it, but their mission is to apply technology, design, and risk management to the massive reduction of our environmental footprint, which is a pretty big goal. They won gold in the climate change category at the Canadian Environment Awards in 2008. Previously, he's done this more than once. He was the founder, CEO, and president of Algorithmics, which is a very well-known company. Took it from a startup to one of the largest risk management companies in the world, and has been consistently voted one of the top 50 best managed companies in Canada, which is amazing. And a 10-year academic career at Yale University, cross-appointed between the Department of Computer Science and the School of Management. He's on the board of many different things, involved in many different things, and a great community leader. So I'm really happy to introduce you to Ron Dembo.
Kind of reminds me of Monty Python in a way. Kind of like a mouth or something completely different. Never thought I'd ever learn about community sanitation, but thank you.
There we go.
So most of the work we do in changing culture, changing behavior, is actually happening in this first world, in places like Canada, the US, Europe. So that's what you're going to see a little bit of. And I'd like you to sort of glaze over a bit and think, what can you apply from this? Because they're basic principles which I think apply in really way out places. We do work in the Congo, for example, in the eastern Congo, which is the other end of the extreme in this world. Probably the most dangerous place I've ever been to. And obviously you can't do the kinds of things that we do here and there, but there are definitely principles that carry over. And one of them starts with the word sustainability. I mean, we really do believe that the nice thing I like about the previous talk was it's a sustainable model. Once that works, it's going to continue working, and it's sort of self-propagating. Any kind of aid-based model where you come in and make a change and walk away is not necessarily sustainable, and probably not at all sustainable. So all of the things we do have that principle behind us, sustainability. It's actually a principle I wish we'd apply in Canada about the way we live. It's a separate story. So we're really about massive change. So there's another, this isn't just rhetoric, but It happens to, I'm going to talk about design thinking a lot. So design thinking is a way of saying, look at a problem like this. You want to change the world, you want to reduce carbon in a big way. It implies constraints on how you do things. So for example, when I say massive change, any program that we do has to be scalable. Just by definition, otherwise it'll never be massive. And so any model, if you want a massive change in sanitation in India, you better have some model that's actually scalable. If it requires 47 people in one village to get the village to change, it might never ever scale to the point we want to. So that's a constraint. So think of that, you can almost label what constraints you need to generate. So when you know what your mission is, it actually, if you use design thinking, it immediately tells you where at least your constraints are. So one of the things that struck us, what struck me when I first started thinking about the environmental space, is that there just is no measurement. You know, not even, it's the most basic stuff is missing. For example, we're in a room now. Is this a good room or a bad room from an environmental point of view? Is the air good here? Is it better than the room across the way? Is it better than the boardroom in TD Center? I don't know. Is it better than your classroom? Don't know. Is the energy in this room a normal amount of energy for a room this size? And so on and so on. We just don't even measure this. So I'm going to show you what happens when you don't measure environmental factors. You get stuff that's way over the map. And that's the next sort of principle which carries over. Measurement. It's absolutely crucial no matter what you're doing. Because otherwise you have no way of, measurement and benchmarking are integrated into any business practice. But that's there for a good reason. It's because it allows you to actually make improvements and know that you're making improvements. So the basic vision here was, the environmental world has no benchmarking, so let's make it happen. That's essentially driving our behavior. And essentially what it would amount to is, how do we make energy, carbon, the air quality in this room visible? Well, we can use software to do that in graphic design, and that's what I'll show you. So what we value, values are also important, is that we like evidence-based initiatives, things that are based on evidence, not just anecdotal or emotional stuff. And we like sustainable commerce, and you'll see how that guides our Congo thinking. And we like learning by discovery, because I don't think we know the answers to most problems, and I think we can discover the answers. That implies a particular strategy in how you implement stuff. So think of it. Let me leave you with a little anecdote. There's a 6-minute talk I usually give on risk management. It goes something like this. The simple notion is this, is that there's two kind of worlds we live in, two kind of problems we might face. You go into Africa, you're trying to change the way people, go to the toilet sort of thing. There are two kind of problems you might face. One is one where the world that you're moving into is totally uncertain. You don't have all the data, you don't have the evidence, you don't know what works, you don't know who to talk to, you don't know how to implement, you don't know what the budget will, a lot of uncertainty. And there's another which is very, very certain. For example, take a program like some of the programs in Malawi done around AIDS. They've worked very, very well, and it's now a matter of execution. Do more of the same thing, do it better, execute better, reduce the supply chain. That's a deterministic world. And in a deterministic world, which is most of what we learn in school, you want to execute well. But in a stochastic world, a random world, the optimal strategy is to actually hedge. So in other words, if I'm going into a very uncertain situation, I don't know if something's going to work, I don't put all my eggs in one basket and put all the funding for that. I hedge and I learn. And as I learn, I get better scenarios on what works and what doesn't work until I actually converge to a deterministic. If this works, do more of it and do it better, figure out a way to reduce the supply chain, etc. If it doesn't, try another hedge. That's a very important concept, because most of what we learn about in management and in textbooks is about the execution. It's not about how to deal with the risk. So we like this idea of a virtuous circle, which really revolves around measuring. And we don't measure just for measurement's sake. I mean, if I tell you your footprint is 26, it's meaningless. But if I tell you the guy next to you has a footprint of 10, well, it starts to get meaningful. So you measure because you want to be able to quantify things. But you do it because you want to be able to compare. So the average footprint of a Canadian compared to another Canadian kind of makes us think, but compared to the average Congolese is not a very good comparison. So you compare because you really want to find norms. What's the norm? And you want to be able to change that, you want to know whether you've made any change by looking at how you've affected those norms. So you measure, so you can compare, so you can change. And if you think of this virtuous circle, it's kind of like a snowball effect. As you measure and compare and change, you can actually do more, more, and more. But keep those things in your mind. So there's basic principles. I'll just go back over them. Think when you're attacking a problem, think, is this deterministic, is this stochastic? Or is it mostly stochastic, mostly deterministic? If it's stochastic, you know that you're going to have to hedge. It's just a fact. So try a number of things. If it's deterministic, figure out how to make it work more efficiently. Yeah. So one of the things that we do is try to make it simple. So whatever you do, try to make it simple. So for example, here is the way in which we measure people's footprint, for example. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this, but you're seeing two things in that little gauge. One is we explain to people how this gauge works, and then from then on, life gets easy. It's pointing to exactly what your footprint is in this case, or the amount of energy you consume or whatever. And the green, yellow, and red are a comparison to your peers. Green is the best third, yellow is the middle third, red is the worst third. So people aren't really interested if their footprint or their energy consumption is 10.675. They're interested as to whether they're green, yellow, or red for their peers. Because if you're red, you kind of don't, it has more of an effect on your behavior change than money or anything else. So we measure because you can compare. Imagine two things. Imagine I take you, and this probably applies just as this probably applies just as well to anything just like the initiative we just heard about. But imagine I take you to a school, wherever it is, and that school's a red. Red means it uses a lot of energy per student. And take you to the school next door and it's a green. And you walk from one school to another. Guess what are you going to do? That's going to start viscerally impacting you, and you're going to say, well, first of all, why is it a red? And what can I do about it? It's as simple as that. So this is, we would do this for the CEO of the TD Bank, as well as for some project in a developing country. So things do carry over, but they have to be simple. Now, this might be culturally not appropriate in some countries, but you get the picture. Now, in our world, red, yellow, and green have a pretty ingrained meaning in us from the first days of looking at traffic lights. So that's going to provoke change. And in our case, we often say it saves money. Because when that needle goes down, you use less energy and it costs less. And you're more sustainable. And it impacts the environment. So I'm going to show you a particular initiative we're involved in now. It's with schools, but it's actually around any buildings and individual homes and so on. It's very new. It was only launched 3 or 4 months ago. And there are about 1,000 schools involved now. And the context for this is that simply most of our environmental footprint comes from operating buildings. So in Toronto, 63% of all of our footprint is from operating buildings like the one we're in. In London, it's something that order of magnitude as well. And we think that there's a lot more bang for the buck in going after children and changing their behavior than it is in trying to change our behavior. Perhaps you're in a way different generation than I am, But I can tell you that my generation and the generation above you, which is about 6 generations below me, is not changeable easily. And there's a very interesting fact. More children will graduate from school in the next 20 years, 20 to 30 years, than in all of history. Kind of a startling fact. We're going to graduate more kids from school in the next 20, 30 years than have ever gone to school in all human history. So that's nice. Let me show you this. This is the carbon copy, so I'm going to jump over to the real thing. So here we are, we're live in Toronto, and we're going to dive into Toronto. And what we're looking at here are schools. And these pimples on the map are, the size is proportionate to the footprint of that school. So here's where the measure comes in. But what you see immediately here is you see that it's all over the map, so to speak. It's like, here's a school where to educate a student is something like 30 times more than the neighboring school. Now, have you ever seen anything that's that big in any walk of life? See that little dot there? This little one? These are neighboring schools. And to educate a student here takes 30 times as much carbon as it does in the school next door. Now that's a factor of 30. You think, well, that's crazy. Imagine if I went around this room and I said, how much does everybody eat? And I'll measure it in pounds. I bet you the differences would be order of magnitude 20% maybe. Because if you ate 30 times as much as me, you would be eating 40 hours a day, and it would be hard to get it in your mouth. I'd have to force feed it. And if you drove 30 times as fast as me, you would be flying. But flying fast. So this is crazy. This is a really good example where measurement hasn't been applied, and so you see things that are completely out of whack. I mean, this is the same school board. So let's...
Sunnyview, by the way,
yeah.
Which is that big circle, is where they're very severely disinfected.
Sure. I mean, there might be a good reason for it. But I can show you many, many more. Here is Ledbury Park, for example, which is a green school. So let me take you to show you where it fits in this order of things. Oh, I didn't log on, sorry. I'll just log in. So I had to reboot this thing. The reason I'm going to do this, I'm going to show you, is that they are, oh well, I'll just tell you, it's easier. If you took Sunnyview, if you took Ledbury Park and you compared it to this school, Ledbury Park would be here, and it's still below the median. It looks green. In other words, the difference between Ledbury Park and this school is a factor of about 8 or something. So that's still a big number. So if we did this for every home in Toronto, as we have done it for the universities and homes and that, you see the same thing. You can see 2 houses in the same neighborhood that have hugely different footprints. So the reason I'm going through this in great detail is that this is essential. And you might think, well, this is only a first world kind of thing. It actually isn't. You'll see that what we're doing in the Congo is relevant to that. So the way we influence change is, first of all, we show people where they are, how they compare to their neighbors, and it's quite shocking, actually. You are 5 times worse than a neighboring school, and you're still, one of the best schools. That means that you could save energy, a huge amount of energy, and still live well, which would mean a huge amount of cost, which means, yeah.
Do you use a series of questions or metrics or something to arrive at your answer? Or are you hired on to guide people through the process?
So that's a really good, I'm glad you asked the question, because the question is, how did we design this? How did we design the experiment to get to this? Well, if we want to do this for every building in the world, it's not ambitious, or for every school in the world. Well, how could we do that if it involved anything like a questionnaire? it would be too complex. You'd have to get the question out of school, you'd have to judge the results, there'd be mistakes in the answers. So eliminate that. How do we get something that's 80% of the footprint or 90% easily? It turns out, just look at the utility data. The utility data is known, it's concentrated. I go to 2 databases in France, and I have every single building, every single school, every single business benchmarked like this in 2 man-months. Whereas if I put out a question, it would be impossible. So that's a really important thing. You see, when you think of design thinking, you have to start there. We're lucky. In this case, you can get an 80-90% of the footprint, so the ranking will be pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to zip back to the PowerPoint quickly. So it's really as simple as that. You know, we spent probably, to get to this gauge, it looks very simple. Here's the process. We had people meeting in a room, a diverse group of people, a design charrette, as it's called, every 2 weeks for 6 months. It was myself managing it, a group of usability experts, a group of technical experts, and a group of designers. And in the end, that's the product. I'll show you the original thing, which looked pretty good. But you know, this is huge, this is tremendously simple, but it doesn't come quickly. So design, I like the way designers work on problems. I think if there's anything I would recommend is you learn how to operate the way designers do, because they are very good at solving problems under uncertainty, or where you don't know what the solution is going to look like. So we've added one more feature to this, which allows people to challenge each other. So if you're a school, you can pick another school and say, I'm going to challenge you. And then you get into thinking, well, wait, my school's older than yours, it's, you know, the windows are leakier, it's not fair. Well, we get around that problem very, very simply. It's another design thing. That we look at the school, the percentage reduction going forward is greatest, and that's the one that wins. And that gets around all of those problems of normalization. And you get people arguing for ages about how do you normalize one building against another. Well, you change that by just measuring going forward. So that was a nice, easy solution. And we're going to do one more thing, which is about to change behavior. Because the whole idea here is, the problem with our electricity data and energy data is it's very hard to get it in real time. So there are a group of schools here, there's a group of schools here that has real-time data. It's 80 schools. But for the rest, we can't do it. So we're trying to introduce a daily buzz. And there's frequent flyer miles. Exactly. Basically, every kid gets a point. And that point is equivalent to a kilogram of carbon. Why a kilogram? Because a kilogram actually is a meter cubed. It's kind of big, but it's small. It's small in the sense that one hamburger is a kilogram of carbon. So the idea is you take a kilogram of carbon out a day. Every kid does. But the way the points work is this. You're given a bunch of points. You're allowed to allocate the points to people who've done good. So you're learning how to reward people. You can't allocate them to yourself. And you give a point to anyone who's just taken a kilogram of carbon out. So if Johnny didn't rode his bike to school today, you give him a point. And then the teacher verifies Johnny didn't. So really, in the end, those points are worth something. So it's very much like frequent flyer miles. I would suggest that that's a very good, we've learned that that really works, frequent flyer miles. So I'm going to mention one other thing, and that is just around the Congo. So we actually are working in the Congo, in the eastern Congo, which is probably, I don't know why we started there, but it's just coincidental. I met this guy, and then it changed my life. But he's really an impressive guy. His name is Manuka, and he was found as a little orphan. And he's now got 3 sets of twins. But what's interesting, if you stand next to him, his back is that big. It's all muscle, and he's this tall. Anyway, so this is an area where these gorillas are endangered. They're endangered because people live close to these forests, and those forests, people living close to forests, are desperately poor and have no resources, no means of survival. But there's another carbon story here, is that one way, one thing that happens there is that women are actually treated like slaves. You'd be amazed to see what happens there. But anyway, slave labor to cut down trees, to actually make them into charcoal, to turn them into fuel, and actually to use these gorillas as food. It's not an easy world, but it's a world that in some strange way we're tied to. If we want to solve the carbon problem in this world, which we sort of do, we can't do it without solving the Congolese problem in some way, because these are the virgin forests that when they're cut down produce as much carbon as all the coal plants in the world. So there's as much carbon generated from cutting down trees as there is from burning coal. And unless we solve that problem and protect those forests, so the way we do it is by empowering women in those villages, particularly women. And it's a whole other story. I'll be happy to talk about it when I have time.
Thanks so much, Ron. So we've heard from two excellent behavior changers, I think, today, which is great. Can I have confirmation that we have 10 minutes left? Is that right? Yep, okay. So we don't have a ton of time to do our activity, but this is an EWB conference, and we've learned a whole bunch about behavior change. But at EWB, we know that just learning about something is not enough. So in the spirit of this conference, I want to tease out some of the strategies and methodologies and elements of behavior change that we've heard from these two speakers today. And I'm going to ask for a scribe maybe to write some of them down on the flip chart. And I want you all to think of a change that you're trying to make in your community, in your company, in your school, in your chapter, something like that. And we're going to try to think of some of the elements of behavior change that we can apply to our own communities. And we probably won't have time today, but I hope when you leave this conference, you'll be able to make a plan for how you're going to create that behavior change when you go back and use this learning that you've gained today. Great. Might work. So, we've had two very different, I don't know how close I should, very different talks. One on environmental footprints, reducing your environmental footprint, and tools to do so, and measure your environmental footprint and measure the change. We've had one on community-led total sanitation and changing people's behavior through maybe shock value, I guess. So can we have some hands for things you can think of? How to change behavior. What are some of the things you heard? Yep.
I think you can't do something for someone else. You have to teach them how to do it, because if you do it for them, it's like the saying, if you give up a guy a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. So you can't do it for him. You have to let him do it so that you can pass on the information to everyone else.
Sure. Great. Can everyone hear that? Okay, good. More? Yep. Okay.
To come from a really broad perspective, I think was in common with both, that they had questions, not answers, or information. Yeah, if there was some questions of what you want to achieve, do you want to achieve?
Great. So not giving answers, but asking questions. Great. Yep.
It's important to use data and evidence, not just your opinion and guess.
Mm-hmm. So both cases we are showing people, providing evidence, right, in order to, I guess, convince them to change their behavior. Good. So where's some of that feedback? Yeah.
I think people have to have some form of investment, maybe in the form of equity or something.
Mm-hmm. Investment so that they have an incentive to change their behavior. Yep.
So I'm just going to continue that. I've seen both of them had sort of aha moments that were really both very visually based, which I think is important.
Good, yeah, so really like a moment where there's a realization, right?
Yeah.
Where you're able to realize that you need to change something. Good. So bringing about that situation. Are you keeping up, sort of, Carly? Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So tying right into that, it seemed, at least for CLTS, and to an extent for both of them actually, if you can have people have ownership of the idea and feel like they contributed to the development of the idea, even though you kind of had it all planned out from the beginning, but you don't have to tell them that.
It's called facilitation.
Oh, okay. But that.
Yeah, no, but that's a very valid point, right? You're not telling people things, but you're facilitating people making their own realizations and bringing knowledge out in themselves. Evan, did you?
I guess it's really related to the first and last point then, just changing our relationships.
Yeah.
In both of those initiatives, there's a lot of peer pressure that more positive light.
Yeah, definitely. Peer pressure.
Yeah, pressure each other and kind of.
Great. Yeah, that's a great one. Behavior change that's visual or known among your peers. That's very powerful.
That's what was interesting is comparing the games like that, the high-tech games with the pile of rice and
Yeah.
shit.
Yeah. Visual indicators. Yeah. That's really interesting.
And it's interesting, you should get a stop on that.
Yep.
Notably, to change yourself before you change others.
Yeah. Definitely. And kind of that element of humility, right? You don't have all of the answers, and all of us can change and improve.
Yep. Make it competitive.
Mm-hmm.
That drives more. Well, I want to do better than the other person.
Right, comparative. So comparative rather than absolute.
Competitive.
Oh, competitive. Sorry.
That applies to skills, yes,
Yeah, competitive. Okay. Good.
Oh, I just said, like, just keep the idea simple, like the CLTS there, like their design plan, like, showing them and just like, oh, how would you do, like, show what your houses look like, and just simple idea, and then the other one, they also just use a very simple game that's very visually appealing to anyone who
Simple, clear, right? Yeah.
It struck me that even it's funny how I always try to find imagine you were to measure.
Can you speak into the mic, please? You've got one right there.
Imagine if you were to measure the incidence of disease in a non-CLTS framework and a CLTS, or whatever you call it, the DEF, whatever. You just put a gauge up on the village and how much disease you've got in this compared to all. You know, you might see that might resonate. I mean, not who knows what will resonate, but basically what drives people is, I don't want to get sick. But there you can be measured.
Robert, do you want to see?
No, I'm inspiring this idea. Do you think we do that in the lorry?
What do we do? It's a diarrhea. Putting up a gauge.
Having some sort of visual representation of the incidence of diarrhea.
No, well, sometimes we do like what we call a shit calculation. We ask people like how much like they shit in a day, how much one person shits in a day, how many people live in the village, and then they start adding it up, and then they compare it to like how many like bags of waste that is and stuff, and people get to see like, oh my gosh, we shit like 300 kilograms of waste or something.
But I was getting to the effects of it. I mean, the real issue is what is it that might drive change? Is it trying to reduce illness? I mean, for me, that's the first thing that jumps to mind, but it might be something else.
But that's
So,
your point, but not.
No, but I'm saying I don't know what that number is, but measuring that number and presenting that number would be important, whatever the number is.
right, and I think we forgot probably to mention during the CLTS presentation that they really rely on 3 big principles, which are shame, fear, and disgust. So like the rest of the community, like will shame everyone else who doesn't have enough needs, and then they'll put that pressure on them to change. The fear of getting sick, like we mentioned, and then like the disgust. So like those are 3 key elements.
This is really interesting one. I mean, related to participant to monitor, whether communities could monitor, could themselves monitor, maybe women's groups could monitor the numbers of cases of diarrhea that they have.
It's comparing across communities.
And then across communities. But actually, even the women's groups, but yes, and then across communities. Part of the problem is there are many variables.
No, I mean, I just threw it out as the first thing that jumped to my mind.
But that's the other thing that the ODS celebration does, right? So it makes like villagers decide that ODS village compare themselves against their village, and they say, oh, look, they're ODF, like we should also become ODF so that we get assigned an event celebration. So that's the element of the competition.
The one triggering I got to be a part of in Zambia did exactly what you're suggesting. The one triggering I got to be a part of in Zambia did what you're suggesting, compared the amount, they did the calculation of how much shit is produced, found it per year, and then talked about how many the cost of building a team to be able to take to absorb that amount of shit, compared that cost, and we calculated how many times people have to go into a town and go see a doctor because of diarrhea and the cost associated to that. And once you have the cost of building latrines versus the transportation costs and the medical costs of dealing with the diarrhea, it's a really clear vision.
So I'm hearing a few different things. I'm hearing the value of simple visual representations of information. I'm hearing the value of comparing the change in one group or the change in one community over time, and I'm hearing the value of comparing two different communities to each other. Is that about right? Yep.
I was going to say, I think it kind of came out in this conversation is that the behavior change, you don't really know what works, and you have to keep trying new things and experiment as much as you can. Mr. Chambers said, CLTS has done a lot of failures, so we keep trying to keep doing
Try again. Yep.
One thing that came out of this CLTS chat was that the facilitators had to have like a really intimate knowledge of the communities that they were working with.
Okay, so knowing who you're trying to change or changing with them. Maybe two more, the last two to volunteer.
I was just going to say that I think that what you were saying earlier, it sort of goes in line with risk assessment and risk evaluation that you were kind of talking about earlier in the preparation. I think the organization that you set up before.
So assessing the risk of the change. How risky is it to make that change for someone?
Yeah.
Good. And building a case almost.
Yeah.
Right. Yep, Sarah?
I had a feel for kind of how dangerous it is to try and create behavior change, like going and thinking that you want to accomplish something, but not really being sure of all the factors that are present. So really trying to gain a solid understanding before you try and create that change is really
But it's not just about, you can go and sort of be, you've got to try things. So you try a few things, and you don't take out machine guns and blast the whole village. You know what I mean? You do one or two little things, and you see what happens. That analogy, I mean, not Sierra Leone style, but whatever. But you have to try. One doesn't get there without actually doing something. And if things are dangerous, the world's dangerous, life's a bitch sort of thing, but you've got to do it. Really, I mean that quite sincerely. You have to get out there and try. Like, I don't know what the metric would be, but I bet you there's some metric, as you pointed out, that would get people to move. Whether it's, how much it costs you and how much diarrhea is costing you or whatever. There's some metric that you could display, and maybe the graphics are not a gauge because they're not used to driving cars, but there's another graphic that I'm sure would work with maybe, who knows. But
the crucial thing is that in the case of CLTS, that any graphic should be generated by them. You can facilitate they've got to do.
It's got to be resonant to them. I mean, that gauge resonates with us, but it won't resonate to them.
Great. So I'm going to have to cut it off there. I hope maybe you've written down some of these things that resonate with you. I hope you can all go back home and create a great behavior change plan for your own community. So thank you very much, Robert and Ron, for participating in the session. Thank you.